Welcome everyone to episode number 5 of our Tuesday Talks and Tips. And in case you have not noticed, I am sitting in my car, just like Andrea is, I think, or no,
No,
she's
I'm
somewhere
sitting in
else.
my
Right,
house
right. Just to let
on my
everybody
couch.
know, just to let everyone know, I'm in my car right now. However, as we know in Toastmasters, the show has to go on. So we are starting on time. And for those who are coming in for the first time, please know that this is being recorded and it will be shared with the Pathways discussion on the Pathways discussion forum, as well as on certain district sites. Because, hey, we want to help people with this information. And our I won't say speaker because she's so interactive. She's a speaker, but she's also a presenter. She's amazing. She's the District 3 Pathways. There, see, I'm going to invent my
No,
own
you're
word.
doing fine. Keep
I
going.
think she's the Pathways chair, but I would say that she's the Pathways champion and of course the chair. And she has created a team that helps with Pathways. They do they have help desk, they have publications, they do a lot of cool stuff. And if you were here last week, Trish did the flip side of this webinar. She had her session 4 last week, was on how do you help new members get started. Well, this meeting or this webinar, episode 5, is about how do you help or how do you handle members who are unhappy with Pathways? How do you deal with people who say, oh, I'm not happy, I'm leaving, I'm not going to renew? How do you deal with that? And I think Trish is, knowing her, she's probably going to want some interaction. However, for the benefit of the recording and so that we can make progress as smoothly as possible, please hang on to your questions until she pauses and says or asks for questions. Because if you unmute and ask the question anytime, then she might end up not covering all the material that she would like to cover. And so at this point, let us all welcome Trish Blackwelder. Let's give her a big hand. Oh, I can clap. I'm holding my phone. There.
I
Take it
love
away, Trish.
virtual clapping. Oh, well, thank you again, Michelle, for a lovely introduction again. I intended to wear my red target. I didn't remember to change my outfit, though, to my red target. Last week, if you recall, if you were here, I made a joke that as the District 3 Pathways Chair, I wear not an actual one, but, imaginary big red target on my back to every Toastmasters event we have here. And I tell people to fire away with any Pathways questions or concerns that they have. So I have been building a list of pain points with Pathways, and I'm using my collective list as a basis for this presentation tonight. So hopefully we will have touched on a lot of the bases of challenges or concerns or hesitations that we have on the part of our members to jump into Pathways. Now, I'm going to make an assumption that this is really not new members. New members coming in only know Pathways, and they are usually excited to jump right on board. We're really going to focus on the seasoned members, as I will call them, those that were in Toastmasters before the deployments and have been hesitant or just downright ornery about not wanting to get on board with Pathways. If I have misunderstood or if you have any other I'd love some use cases, so feel free to type away in the chat window, and Michelle and I will do our best to follow that and then bring those into the conversation. All right. Just to give you an idea of what my list kind of looks like so far, the one I hear most often is, why did we have to change anyway? Everything was just fine. So that will be one of the first things I want to take on right out of the gate. I've also heard level 1 and level 2 are boring. Why do I have to repeat them every time? I've also heard, why can't I look ahead? I want to know how to prepare. And I love being able to answer that question. I have had folks say, it's just too much new. It's too overwhelming. I can't deal with it. So we'll see what we can do to make it a little easier for everyone. I have some blatant ones like navigation sucks. I hear that a lot. Evaluation forms are just too generic. They don't do anything for me. I have no motivation for meeting roles because the roles are all buried. I need advice for new members and how to get them to take the assessment. We have the technophobes, of course, and I got a new one at the last TLI last Saturday. Why do we have to pay for more paths? That was a new one. And then chartering clubs feel very crippled with pathways. So if you have anything else that's not on my list, again, feel free to type it in the chat window, and I'll get to it as best I can tonight. Okay, let's start with the first one. Change just sucks. Okay, well, change, nobody likes change. We're all creatures of habit. But I remember being taught a saying at one point that a rut is a grave with no ends, and I started embracing change more because I didn't want to feel like I was in a grave. Again, everything changes. Life is constant change. This is just another one that everybody has to deal with. But again, part of our job then as pathway champions is to give folks that warm and fuzzy that it hasn't changed as much as some folks think. There's still a lot in pathways that's very familiar with things that we've known for years and years. It's not as though they threw out the Toastmasters program and are starting from scratch. This is really an evolution of our educational program to the next step, something that we need to do in order to continue to improve ourselves, continue to make ourselves a leader in training for communication and leadership skills development. And so let's look and find where we still have things that we're very familiar with. If you were on the session last week, you heard me use the early deployment document that we had, paths and core competencies document, where the 5 core competencies of Toastmasters are listed on the left side, and the right side has the list of 11 paths. Remember that number 1 on our core competencies is public speaking. We have and always will be a public speaking organization, so that is still at the top of the list. And we still deliver on our mission of helping people build their self-confidence. And so confidence, although it can't be learned from a book, is still something that is constantly learned through experience. And so those two things are still very much a part of the educational program. For several years now, we've learned to talk in terms of communication tracks and leadership tracks. And while we don't have the actual tracks anymore, there's still a communication focus and still a leadership focus in our educational program. Public speaking and interpersonal communication are core competencies that are obviously part of the communication side. And then strategic leadership and management are obviously on the leadership side. And again, if you saw the presentation last week, and if you didn't, I will be glad to share my resorted list of paths, because I sort them according to the emphasis they have in either the communication or in the leadership side of the learning. When you resort that then, you'll find that we have paths that line up very well with an emphasis towards the communication development. And we also have 4 paths that line up very well with the leadership side of the educational program. So really, the conversation for me with a prospective member or a new member hasn't changed much. I still ask the same questions like, are you here primarily to work on communication skills or leadership skills? And then based on their answer, I'll ask them to say more public speaking or interpersonal communication, or if it's leadership, more strategic or more managerial. And by getting those answers, I'm able then to go to the right side of the page and help them narrow down which paths will probably be most appropriate for them. I was just looking at okay, that's is it Rati? I see your comment that you have typed, and I will add that to my list here and see what I can do to address that then. Okay, so again, back to new members or prospective members, talking to them about why they want to be a Toastmaster. What are they expecting to get out of Toastmasters? Still will give us very similar anchor points to what we've used for years and help us to steer them towards the paths that will be most appropriate for them. And again, none of that conversation requires that you have a computer in front of you. It's still something that can be done from a handout, and a handout that they can take with them and continue to look at, bring back to the next meeting with any comments or questions, and then the conversation again would continue. Okay? All right. Moving on into an actual path then. Remember that each path is going to consist of 5 levels, starting with mastering fundamentals and moving through complexity until you get to demonstrating expertise at the end. Now, another common complaint is, well, I liked a competent communicator manual. I liked having those 10 basic skills. I liked doing a competent communicator for my club every year. It kept me in practice on my basic skills, and it was an educational award for the club. Again, if you're looking closely at the detail of a path, you'll see that all 9 of the 10 projects from the communications manual are still in every path. You'll find icebreaker, the organize and get to the point speeches, the research and presenting speech are all in level 1. And level 2, you'll generally find one other. The one I'm looking at right now in presentation mastery includes effective body language. And then when you get to level 3 and electives start being introduced, you'll find the remainder of the 9 of the 10 communication projects. Now, persuasive speaking is the 10th one. It is still included in the presentation mastery path, but it is only included in the presentation mastery path. The other 9 from the Competent Communicator Manual are present in all 11 paths. I hope that was clear. Ping me in the chat room if that wasn't, and I'll slow down and back up again. Okay? All right, so again, something familiar. We're still going to work on those basic presentation skills that we've known and loved for years and years. And yes, you are going to give an icebreaker for every path that you undertake. But I like to share my story. As a Toastmaster, I finished 17 competent communicators before Pathways was introduced. I can guarantee you that my icebreaker for my first competent communicator and my icebreaker for my 17th competent communicator were nothing alike. The challenge that we need to remember here is that we should do an icebreaker that is representative of our current skill level as a Toastmaster. So a brand new member is going to do a very traditional icebreaker, probably talking about themselves, probably doing something sequential about I started here, I'm now here, or I'm here in Toastmasters because of this, while a seasoned member like myself, as a 5-time DTM from the Legacy program, would do something probably considered out there, something really strange. One of my icebreakers was a take on Star Trek's Lieutenant Commander Data about tomato, and how to be human or robotic. And that was an icebreaker that told a little bit about my love for Star Trek, as well as doing a comparison and introducing people to Lieutenant Commander Data, who was one of my favorite characters. So there's ways to make that icebreaker very interesting. It's still just a 4 to 6 minute speech about any topic that you'd like to choose. You need to meet your time. You need to make it interesting for your audience and check it off your list as being done. Okay? All right. What I also love is the fact that if I'm going to do something like the presentation mastery path over and over again, because I'm really focused only on public speaking, and the presentation mastery path is the purest of the public speaking paths, then those electives are really going to come in handy each time I go back through presentation mastery, so that I can do a different elective, spice it up, change it up. Maybe throw some leadership in this time because I feel more leader-like this time through this path. So I have the option now of not doing the same advanced manual projects over and over again, or the same competent communicator projects over and over again. Instead, I'm going to have fundamentals that will be the same each time I do the path, but I'm going to be able to spice up my journey through that path by choosing from the different electives that are offered in levels 3, 4, and 5. Lots of ways now to make doing the same path over again much more interesting than doing the traditional manuals over and over again. So that takes us pretty much through a path then. Let me pause here for just a moment and see if anybody has anything they want to add or any specific questions about the material I've covered so far. Okay. All right, not seeing anything new, I'm going to jump back here and take a look at Rati's question. Why is the entire material not available like traditional programs? We get opportunities in real life for which a reference to a project, which is not open yet, will be very helpful. Okay, let me see. I don't work for Toastmasters International, but I am an ambassador for Toastmasters International. However, if you've spent any time so far in Pathways working through a path, I have completed 2 paths already. I'm working on 2 more. So as I've now finished 2 paths, I've realized that yes, I can look ahead. Yes, I can see a project description and know what's going to be expected for me for that project. And in some cases, there are electives that I'm going to want to do over again in my newer paths that I'm working on. Can I go ahead and start looking for the opportunities, or perhaps step in to an ad hoc opportunity that I want to be able to use for something in one of my paths? Technically, the expectation from World Headquarters is that you would start any project within 90 days of actually activating that level or project in Pathways. However, there's nothing in Basecamp that would prevent you from downloading a project description and the evaluation form and starting to prepare a project, or even give a project if you've done that project before, and then holding on to that until that level and project can become activated in your Basecamp. There. I've put myself on the line with that one.
Yes.
I know that there is one project one elective project from the Presentation Mastery Path. I'm going to do it again in my Effective Coaching Path. I already have gone through the content the time I went through it in Presentation Mastery. I've already got the project picked. I know what I'm going to do. I know when I'm going to start it, and I'm going to go ahead and get to work on it. And there, I've put myself out here.
Right, right. And Rati has a question. His hand is up. Could you unmute yourself, Rati, and ask your question? Do you know how to unmute there?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
So it's regarding icebreaker.
Yes.
So we have one icebreaker in each path. Recently, one of our members in an advanced club, he took a path called humorous, the new path, and according to him, the icebreaker in each path um, has the same specification. It doesn't give you any extra information about the path that you have chosen, so that learning that or reading that material, you can modify your icebreaker speech as a humorous or as a normal presentation or something that you want to focus on leadership. So he went there and he just gave a normal icebreaker because his icebreaker requirement did not mention that it is supposed to be humorous. But when he finished the speech, he didn't get a very good evaluation because the evaluators expected him to give a humorous speech because he's chosen that path. And he was, that moment itself, he was extremely demotivated because according to him, all the icebreaker do not give a different specification.
Again, if you go back and look at the icebreaker project description, it's going to suggest. Michelle, were you involved in the discussion that was in one of the Facebook groups where this has been bantered back and forth now for quite some time? But the point is that nowhere in the icebreaker project does it require that you talk about yourself. It's suggested that you talk about yourself because, again, the intent is this would be a brand new member and it's an easy topic for them. But there's nothing specific that prevents you from making the speech about any topic that you want to use. The suggestion is that it helps people get to know you a little better. That's all. We had a gal in one of my clubs that brought in yarn and knitting needles and tried to teach us how to knit because it was a passion of hers. Now, we weren't going to knit, but she made it interesting, and it showed us something more about her. He can give that speech about anything that he wants to give about. You're going to learn something about him more than likely from whatever topic he chooses. And this is a good coaching moment then for the members of your club to go back and revisit the project description for the icebreaker and show that it really can be about anything. And for an advanced speaker or a non-new member speaker, you need to give them that freedom to be able to speak about anything in any style.
Right, right. And I was going to add that, Trish, that this is also a coaching moment for the other members, those who will be evaluating, not to require or to set that expectation that because it's a humorous path, because it's engaging humor, it should be humorous. Some people, like myself, when I took the engaging humor path, I said I want to start with the icebreaker. And so my club mates held my feet to the fire. They were saying, that wasn't very humorous. And so I repeated my icebreaker as my second speech, and they gave me more feedback. And then I repeated it again, but that was my choice. So for anyone who's evaluating, who's listening right now, or anyone who'll be listening later, I think the message is very clear. Do not expect or do not require icebreaker speeches to be what is not. in the required objectives, as Trish was saying. And Trish, there's a
Right.
quick question from Keith Jones.
Hmm.
He wants to know, will you ever repeat a path?
Absolutely.
There you are.
Absolutely. I chose presentation mastery because of what I thought it was going to be, but visionary communication was the path that was recommended when I took my assessment. And so because I was a dual member, I chose both of those paths then. Presentation mastery turned out to be a little tougher than I thought it was going to be. And I ended up moving faster through visionary communication. Now, I registered for 8 paths, in part because I needed screenshots to do training sessions. So I had different paths at different stages to take the screenshots. But I want to finish all those paths that I have in my transcript right now. So I'm going to set presentation mastery aside for right now and move on to my next 2. And then at some point I am going to come back to presentation mastery because I want to tackle it again. Now that I have more familiarity with it, I think I know how I could challenge myself better and not have it seem a little more laborious, because I really pushed through on a few things because I had a specific time frame that I wanted to get it done by. So I will take it again, I will enjoy it more, and I will challenge myself to take it to a new level. Okay, let's see. Yes. Okay, so I think I've caught up with the questions that are in the chat. It doesn't seem like anybody has any questions about the material I've covered so far. So let me go through to the next thing I had on my list. Some members, I think it's important for us to remember that some seasoned members never were club officers, never had any reason to ever log into World Headquarters, may not even have ever seen their profile. And we shouldn't just assume, especially those of us who have served as club officers or served in district leadership and are used to going in and out of World Headquarters constantly, we can't assume that every member has ever had an experience with their profile, with their online profile at World Headquarters. And there are certain generations that are just embarrassed to admit things like that. So so when I see a seasoned member that has still not adopted pathways, I talked about critical conversations, and this is kind of along those lines. I want to get some alone time with them. I just want to chit-chat with them, have a casual conversation and see if I can find out or get them to tell me really what it is. And in some cases it's that I don't even know. I don't even know if I have a password. I don't even know if I have ever, I don't ever recall doing anything with my profile. And they'll admit it maybe to me then privately that they would never have said something out loud. So I'm very sensitive to that now and making sure that that is not the barrier keeping someone out of pathways. The fact that they've had an account for so long and never ever done anything with it and don't have the faintest idea how to get into their account. So never assume that it's just that they don't like pathways. It could be a technology challenge of them learning how to use an online account. What we have done in our district is we've had what we call pathways sit-ins, where they're just like a college lab. We get a community facility, we schedule the time, we get 3 or 4 people that are comfortable with pathways and explaining pathways to folks. We bring our laptops, our tablets, our phones if you have the larger screen ones. And we sit there and wait for people to show up. And they come in and they bring their devices, or perhaps they only have a desktop so they use one of ours. But they come in and we just sit side by side with them and take them through whatever they want to do. Sometimes we help them get their login set up. Sometimes we help them change their password because they forgot it. Sometimes we help them get into their base camp. We helped someone do their assessment one time. It's totally non-judgmental. It's just a open session, and come and stay as long as you want and chit chat. And some will stay and then they talk about other things. Well, what are you working on in Pathways, and how did you pick your path, and what have you decided that you liked about it? And I can remember a couple of them, senior citizen types, that with patience and not feeling under pressure, they actually got very excited then. They got in and they could see what they could do, and we showed them how to navigate easily, and and it made a world of difference for them. So perhaps if your district or if your area, in your local area, hasn't tried doing some pathway sit-ins, you might want to put that on the list of things that you could do. The other thing is navigation. We tended to take a very straight approach in. Everybody goes to this link. Everybody gets into Basecamp this way. Everybody sees the 5 blue tiles on the page. And that can be overwhelming, again, for someone that's not real comfortable in an online environment. I have found now that they have made the change where the navigation is available at the top of your profile page, that logging in, clicking on the welcome, and getting right into your profile and entering pathways from that page is a lot less intimidating. There's fewer choices. It's a straight path. It's 3 clicks to get right to your transcript. You bypass the page with the 5 blue tiles on it and get right to your curriculum where you can launch and start learning. And by taking out a lot of the noise, I've had people say, "That's so much better. I'm just going to do that from now on." So don't, again, just because it may be the way that you like to do it, it's not necessarily the way that everybody else will like to do it. So again, it's like a speech to an audience. You need to get to know the person that you're helping, and if they get rattled by too much noise or too much visual content, try to give them a straighter, simpler path into their Basecamp area. And don't worry about telling them about tutorials and resources and all the other things yet. They'll find those when they're ready to, or if you can send them a specific link when they need help on something. But try to keep the noise to a minimum and make it seem simpler for them, and it usually comes across then as being simpler for them. Okay. Once you get to your curriculum, then make sure that they understand how that things have to be activated, and then they can launch content. Some people will say, "Oh, but there's too many choices, too many menus." Again, the simplest, most straightforward way is to launch your content and use the pick list down at the bottom. That pops up a fairly standard menu list that takes you from navigation to your project description to your overview to the first part of your content, which will, of course, vary from module to module. But then you get to the take your pre-assessment about how you feel about your ability on that skill at that point, and then the post-assessment that follows at the end, the evaluation option where they can find their evaluation form, and then, of course, when they do the post-assessment, it will change and the project will be marked complete. I show people both ways to navigate by using the chevrons on the left and right side, and I also show them the pop-up menu from the bottom. And the most favorable responses I get are from the pop-up menu at the bottom. Once they know that that's consistent in every module, if they're looking just for their evaluation form, they know they can go right there and get it. If they're looking just for the project description, they can go right there and get it, and they don't have to keep paging through every page of content to get to something. Okay, so that's, again, just an idea.
And Trish, there's a question from Keith again. Have you looked at the paper paths? I think he means the printed paths.
I will be honest, I have not. I have a friend that lives in the Tucson area. They've been helping some members there with the printed material, and so they kind of clue me in, on what they've been going through with the printed material. I will tell you, I hear more cons than I hear pros, not because the material is bad, but because, number one, you have to wait for it to be mailed to you. Second one is you don't get to choose your electives. Your electives are chosen for you when you go with the printed path. So those are a couple of the big cons that I hear most from folks. What my friend in Tucson has done with some of their clubs is they have a pathway kind of ambassador role in their club, and these people encourage these folks still to use the online approach, but they help them. They help them print out the material that they want to work with, and so they just print the project for them and hand them the project then, and the member goes off and does what they need to do. And that way they can choose their electives, and then they have someone helping them push the right buttons to do the assessments and finish the project when it's done and marked complete. And that seems to be working well for those clubs. Again, there's no quick, sure, one-way answer. You have to know your people, and you have to find the best way that you can to support them. I hope that helps.
Yeah, Trish, may I add a point on that? Some clubs that have no access, not by choice, but because, for example, they're prison clubs, what their coordinator has done is and they have permission, they actually got permission from the powers that be. They have permission to create a Gmail account for the prisoners, but the prisoners don't actually log in. It's just so that they have a Gmail account. And then when the convicts pick their paths, they print out. So this is the pathway starter kit. It actually is a printout of the entire level 1. And then, like you said, once the member has gone through level 1, they're raring to go to level 2. And so the coordinator prints that out.
Mm-hmm. And that's very similar to what my friend is telling me that they're doing down in Tucson, is somebody in the club volunteers, and that's in essence the same thing. As long as the member, can have or be willing to set up an email account, then they can be kind of the go-between for them and help them. Okay. Just working on
There is a comment from Carol. I'm one of 2 members of my club working on a DTM under the traditional program. I find it very challenging to have been one of the more knowledgeable go-to people in the club to not having a good idea of what most of the club is doing in pathways. Thanks, Carol. And actually, Trish, before you answer that, I just wanted to share what you were saying earlier about people, we need to be sensitive to people. I know a 2-time DTM who was so resistant to pathways. And like you said, once I started having this private time with him over coffee, I found out that he had actually exactly the point that you said. He was not comfortable. He had actually depended on the BPE and the officers to submit all his completions. And so he didn't even he didn't know how to log in to the Toastmasters website.
Yep.
Of course, yeah. So that Carol's question is different, but you might want to respond to that in that light.
Yeah. If I'm reading the comment correctly, Carol, and again, just ping in the chat room if I'm misunderstanding. I've been a VPE in a club longer than I should have been. I think I intimidate most people to try to take over what I do for the club. It must be a leadership problem on my part I have to work on. But they, because I'm so in tune with what everybody's working on, I had kind of the reverse problem. I was losing sight of the people that wanted to keep working in the traditional program because I had so many people enrolling in Pathways. But again, when you've got two groups of people working on two different educational programs, if you have to start doing physical trackers or something like that, anything you can to help you. The important thing is to just keep having conversations with people and be excited about everything that they're working on. Every time you hear that they're completing something else, I take the Princess Diana approach and get them to do more of the talking than you are, and that way they'll be telling you about what they're working on, and perhaps that will help you get more engaged again. I hope that helps. I see the question from Mary about watching the videos on Pathways. I watched a lot of the videos at first. When I looked at everything that I could look at, being a Pathways ambassador and a Pathways guide, because I wanted to have as much at my fingertips knowledge-wise as I could possibly have. I found the videos to be very helpful. I liked that they weren't too long. I didn't have to spend half an hour necessarily, looking at something. They are short, they're succinct, they get to the point, they answer one, question or solve one situation at a time. There's a lot of them, though, and sometimes finding the right one can be a little challenging. So I think that's where perhaps World Headquarters could have done a better job of giving us some searchable index or something, rather than always trying to have to figure out by title what it is. Now what happens is when I'm in base camp and I get to a certain point, I'm noticing that they're including somewhere on the page, for more on this topic, watch this video, or for more on this topic, refer to this tutorial. And if I have the time, I'll often check them out to see if there's something I haven't seen yet. Okay, I think I've caught up there. I know you'll keep me honest, Michelle, if I missed anyone's comment in the chat. Okay.
You bet, you bet. Although some are actually just chatting privately with you, like when you said Mary's comment, I glanced and I didn't even see that. So maybe, unless it's a really personal, private question, if it's okay with the audience or the participants, you can just post it to everyone. So just in case, Trish is busy answering something else, I see it and then I can post it to her. But if you want to just post it to her, that's fine as well. She's very on it. Looking down, I can see.
I don't always, I am getting used to using the chat and the balancing the windows. It's a lovely challenge.
You can actually pull up the chat so that it's higher. Mm-hmm. You can pop it up.
Okay. I'll practice driving.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. The very first time I ever taught a structured session on Pathways, my next topic on looking ahead was the absolute mind blower. Okay, everybody in the room, it was like this simultaneous. It was the craziest thing. These were diehard manual people, what I would call diehard manual people, and they're the kind that wouldn't just buy one manual, they bought sets of manuals. And so they're used to having them, they're used to looking ahead, they're used to reading all the assignments in advance. And the thing that they were most panicked about was not being able to look ahead in Pathways. And I showed them at the time how to open the transcript so you see everything, in the list that you're going to need to do for a path. And then I showed them where they could go into tutorials and resources and look at all the project descriptions and look at all the evaluation forms for every project in every path and well, there were 10 paths at the time, all 11 paths now. And that was when I got I can see everything. And I said, you can see everything except the actual learning content. And they all went, okay, that's great. I just kind of, okay, hold it together. I'm so glad I made their day. But I was surprised that was the one barrier for them, was not realizing that they had access to all the project descriptions for every project, every elective, and they had the evaluation forms so they could see what evaluators would be looking for. That was huge for me. Once I found I could do that, I took my first path and I laid out all 5 levels. I knew exactly all my required projects. I knew exactly all my electives that I wanted to take. I had printed the project. I still print some things. I had printed the project descriptions, printed the evaluation forms, stapled them together, put them in my little binder, and I could look at anything to see if there was anything I could start working on at any time. And that was very comforting for me. So I showed them my book and I showed them how I did that, and they were just thrilled. Don't think that you can't see everything. People were all concerned about the DTM project until I showed them where the DTM project description was in tutorials and resources. And I said, there's the DTM project. Take a look. This is what you're going to have to do. There's a lot of the resources, too, that are going to be called out in various projects, required and electives, and you can go see what the resources are like. So I just, I'm still working. I still have, conference calls and meetings and deliverables and stuff that I do during the day. But let's be honest, we've all sat on a really boring conference call. And so I can't leave my computer. I need to pay attention to what's going on in the call, but it doesn't stop me from going into Basecamp and poking around and seeing if there's something I haven't seen yet. So I spent a lot of time just cruising around in Basecamp, not worrying about if I got lost or anything, just seeing everything that I could possibly see and then trying to figure out how to get back to it if I wanted it again.
Thank you, Trish.
Right.
There's a couple of questions from Keith Jones. How do we retain older members who will have their achievements in the old program wiped away on July 1, 2020? Some feel a great loss by starting over from scratch.
Go into your profile, go into your educational achievements, print them off, and frame them. You will always have them then. That's what I'm going to do. All the work that I've ever done, all the achievements I've made, the clubs I chartered, that kind of thing, I'm going to make a scrapbook, out of it and keep it, for myself, so that I'll always be able to remember. I am a 5-time DTM. No one can ever take that away from me, and I know that. So if I can't go visually see it, and except in my scrapbook, I can be okay with that. And I think if we, hold hands, we'll all get through that together.
Yeah, thank you, Trish. And also, just to clarify, it doesn't get wiped away. You will still have, if you were an ACS, if you were an ALS or whatever, you are still that. It's just that it won't appear after your name when you're on the membership roster, but you still have your certificates, as Trish mentioned. And there's a second, it's not from Keith, it's from Rati. One of the clubs I visited complained that they don't like following the sequence. They can see the future projects, but they want it to be more flexible.
Well, again, you can't have everything, unfortunately. So there are going to be some things that are just going to require that we adapt, to them. As I mentioned, there's nothing in base camp that says I can't start a level 5 project even though I'm in level 1. It's not the spirit of the program. It's not what World Headquarters would recommend that I do. But there's nothing that prevents me from doing that as long as I know what the project description is, I know what's going to be expected from me. What I'm going to be missing out on is spending time in the learning content that may have made the task easier for me had I waited and done the content before I started my project. That's the risk I take. But as I start to repeat paths, I can see myself getting ahead on things. I will have done the project in a different path, and I will know what the content's going to be about, and I will be able to be flexible then. So I would encourage each of those members to at least get through their first path, and that way they will be following in the spirit of the program and doing each project and each level in sequence. And then after that, they will have kicked the tires, so to speak, on pathways, and then they'll find their own way to work it.
Yeah, and Trish, just to add on to what you said, when I first joined Toastmasters, I was told that I had to go through the they were not CTM, Competent Toastmaster. You had to go through project by project by project. But when I was on I lost track, number of CCs, I would jump. I would do a speech to persuade, or if I was like a district director visiting a club, I would do a speak to inspire.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah, but at the very first manual, you really had to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah. When, my 5 DTMs, I had a competent communicator, okay. My first one I did in order. After that, I probably never did them in order again. I went through all the advanced manuals, and I finally, and after doing that, I picked the 6 that I like. So I did the same 6 for my, DTM number 2, and the same 6 for DTM number 3, and and so on, because those were the 3. Those were the 6 that I liked to do. So we all know how to work it. We just have to get familiar with it, and the easiest way to get familiar is to follow it in the sequence that it's first presented. After that, you figure out what works best for you, and I think we're still going to have that kind of flexibility in pathways through the use of the electives along with the required projects. Yes, we will have to do a level 1 before we can activate level 2, and a 2 before we activate level 3. That's going to be, the parameters that we operate in. But again, there's nothing that prevents me from looking ahead to a project that I'm going to be doing in level 4 or 5 and starting to get ready for it now, especially if it's one that requires I need to pick 2 or 3 people and put a project team together, and I'm going to need to the project's going to need to take, an X period of time, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months, whatever. Some of them do have time frames on them. So I want to know that, because if I need to pick that, start lining up to get ready to do that project, I can start now on that. And then I'll kick it off whenever I'm ready to kick it off.
Wow, I can't believe how time flies. I can't believe it, but we only have 5 more minutes. Where did time go? We only have 5 more minutes, Trish.
I got something. People that complain about having to do icebreaker over again, and that there's a story about a Green Bay Packer coach called Vince Lombardi. And you've heard this story?
Oh. No, I just love Vince Lombardi's stories. Go ahead.
Okay, but anyway, he would go with the drills, he would raise up and say, gentlemen, this is a football. And then he would go through the basic drills that they have, in football. He would go back to those basics. And I find it helpful to see it a little bit different way, to do an icebreaker.
Mhm.
And any of the speeches, I think. I don't do the same thing, same icebreaker I've done before.
That's right. It's your program. It's your experience. It's your journey through Toastmasters. Your interpretive reading project is going to be different from my interpretive reading project. That's the beauty of what we do. And we're not going to lose any of that because of pathways. We're still going to each find our own way to deliver on every single one of those projects. And the way that Michelle does them, or I think that's Mary that was speaking, does them may inspire me to try something different than when I get to that particular project. So I don't think we're losing any of that at all. Okay. If I had one more thing I just wanted to cover, and that would be the evaluation form. I just did a workshop last night where I was showing people how the new Pathways evaluation aligns to the criteria in the international speech judging criteria for the speech contest, and talking about how excited I was that finally we're going to start teaching our new members from the start about the criteria that it takes to become a world champion, and not make them wait until they go beyond the club to become a contest judge. And again, looked out across the room and watched a lot of light bulbs going off, going, oh, it's not just a boring evaluation form. Then there's really a lot in it and a lot of complexity to it. And I said, that's how I see them now. So it stimulated a lot of good discussion. And if you have done any judging on the International Speech Contest, I challenge you to do what I did. Lay the criteria for content and style, content and style down, and the criteria for the new evaluation forms and pathways. And I think you'll see the same similarities that I am. And I'm just so excited and so thrilled that that's the way we're going to be teaching evaluation to our membership as a whole. I think that's phenomenal.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Trish. And at this point, because we have 2 minutes to the bottom of the hour, let us all thank Trish. Feel free to unmute yourselves and give her a big round of applause for spending 2 sessions last week and now. Let's give her a big hand. Thank you so much, Trish. And speaking of people who have dedicated time for this Tuesday Talks and Tips, we have Lori Haynes here today. And Lori will be next week, August 6th. She will be talking about base camp for club president, VPE, and secretary. And we were talking about looking ahead. I was just thinking, well, you can look ahead a bit. For August 13, we will have base camp tips and tools. And Kaji Barreto, he has a different approach to it, which is quite interesting. And then we bring back Lori Haynes on August 20 for her own take on base camp tips and tools and best practice part 2, so to speak. I'm still looking for somebody who could do a really good level 1 tips, tools, and best practices. And then we have the others. We won't go so far down, but I just wanted to tell you about next week. And for those of you who are regulars, you know that usually I flash a nice cover page. Well, I'm not on my regular laptop, as you know, so apologies for that, but we make do. You see a different approach, which hopefully you also like, being able to look ahead. So thank you very much. It is now the bottom of the hour. At this point, I will end the recording. If I can just figure out how to do that on my phone. And recording, there you are.